So, the sun is shining and it's absolutely cracking flags. Well, it is in the UK anyway. I mean, I'm sure it is in other countries, right? But it never really is in the UK, so when it is, we get a bit overexcited. Anyway, so to celebrate the lovely weather, I'm doing a video where I'm discussing the rise, fall, and rise again of Percy Weasley. Because why not? There's nothing on telly. I've always liked Percy's character. Like, he's really annoying, but I like the fact that he exists, and I enjoy his character arc as the books progress. I don't feel, though, as though we ever got Percy's full story in the films. In fact, to be honest, I don't think we got it at all. In the films, Percy was there, and then he sort of just vanished, and then he suddenly just reappeared as Fudge's little puppet. Then he disappears again, and reappears at the battle. In fact, I don't think in the films that Percy actually has a single line after film 3. I might be wrong about that, but I actually don't think he does. R.I.P. film Percy's character development. In the books though, it's a complete roller coaster. So, until the end of book 3, which is The Prisoner of Azkaban, Percy was annoying and bossy, but ultimately, he feels like a decent person. You feel like he's on the right side of things. He is really irritating though, and jarring, but he tries to look after Ginny throughout the Chamber of Secrets year, albeit failing miserably. And then he follows Harry around during the Prisoner of Azkaban year to try and protect him from potential serious black-related threats. Then things begin to shift a bit throughout Harry's 4th year. Percy begins working for the Ministry as part of Barty Crouch's Department of International Magical Cooperation. And that's when the shift sort of starts. I mean, obviously you can argue that Percy was probably always really power hungry, which is why he sought after becoming prefect and head boy after, but his hunger for power and control gets properly fed and watered during this year. Percy starts to abandon his principles and moral compass in favour of seeking out power and success. So to be fair, the examples of this in the Goblet of Fire year are small, but the writing was on the wall. During the Quidditch World Cup, when the Dark Mark is cast into the sky, Barty Crouch's house elf, Winky, is found with Harry's wand, and is then accused by a Ministry wizard, Amos Diggory, of having cast the Dark Mark. Barty Crouch then shouts at the poor elf in front of everyone and sacks her on the spot. Now what was really happening here is that Barty Crouch had asked Winky to stay with and look after his son, who had managed to steal Harry's wand and cast the Dark Mark using it. So when the Ministry wizards had cast their stunning spells, they unknowingly hit Barty Crouch's son, who was under an invisibility cloak. So Winky never stole Harry's wand, she never cast the Dark Mark, and Barty Crouch knew it. He was just saving face and deflecting attention away from the fact that he was harbouring his criminal son illegally, which nobody knew about, so he publicly humiliated Winky and sacked her. Now back to Percy, right? So even though Percy wasn't there when this happened, the second that he hears about it, he automatically takes Crouch's side and castigates Winky, saying that she deserved to be sacked, which causes Percy to have an argument with Hermione, who of course, being the house elf activist that she is, takes Winky's side. It's a small example, right, but it's the first hint we get that Percy doesn't seem able to recognise that powerful and important people can possibly ever do anything wrong. The whole situation was weird. Why would Winky, a house elf who has served Barty Crouch's family her entire life and presumably never been involved in any criminal activity, randomly steal Harry Potter's wand and run around with it, waving it around like a nutter and causing chaos? She wouldn't. The point I'm making is that Crouch's behaviour is fishy, and the way that he just sacks Winky, who has served him loyally for decades, is savage. But Percy is incapable of seeing that. So not long after this, Voldemort turns up at Barty Crouch's home, and he puts Barty Crouch underneath the Imperius Curse. And he uses that to make Barty go about his work and business as usual. But after a few months, Crouch starts to fight off the Imperius Curse, and Voldemort decides it was no longer safe for him to leave the house. So Percy gets promoted to Crouch's personal assistant, and he starts to represent Crouch at events, and basically starts doing Barty Crouch's job under instructions that he's getting from letters. It's like Percy's ultimate fantasy. Now, Crouch's instructions start to get stranger and stranger as the year goes on, as his behaviour becomes more and more unpredictable as he starts to fight off the Imperius curse. He's cracking up basically big time. Now this is the beginning of Percy's downfall in my opinion. So he's been promoted, he's got a really good job for someone that's basically just left Hogwarts, but he's so blinded by power and wanting to climb the ministry ladder that he either doesn't care or doesn't seem to notice that something very odd is clearly going on. Percy's obviously not an idiot, right, because he finishes school with top grades. He's clearly not stupid, so I think all the power that he's suddenly got has completely gone to his head, to the point that he can't seem to fathom the possibility that Crouch is either losing the plot or has been compromised in some way. Percy should have definitely picked up on something, to be fair. Crouch was someone that never took a single day off work. He was always there on time and he was a very straight-laced guy. Suddenly he's barely ever going to work and he stopped turning up to judge the Tri-Wizard tournament, and he's now sending Percy instructions, weird instructions, by owl. Percy never flags anything to his superiors. Eventually Crouch completely disappears from public, at which point Percy is probably getting instructions that are written by Voldemort or Peter Pettigrew. Imagine that. Voldemort writing letters to Percy asking him to remember to organise work drinks. I bet Voldemort loves a White Russian. I don't know why, I can just imagine him drinking a White Russian. Anyway, so Percy still doesn't notice that anything odd is going on. He's enjoying his power too much. In the end, the Ministry eventually realise that Crouch has completely vanished off the face of the earth, and they drag Percy in for questioning about why he never flagged anything about the weird instructions he had been getting. I'd love to know how weird those instructions actually got. Voldemort asking Percy what he thinks about his new nose job. Anyway, so Percy basically gets suspended from his role. As the year comes to an end, Percy hasn't really done too well, to be honest, in his first year at the Ministry. And Dumbledore and Harry announce Voldemort's return, and Percy's luck takes an upturn. So, Fudge, being completely in denial about Voldemort's return, decides to use Percy's obsession with the Ministry and idealisation of anyone in a position of authority to promote him to Junior Assistant to the Minister of Magic, which is a massive promotion for someone as young as Percy. Probably a chunky pay rise for Percy too. Now, Fudge chooses him because he correctly identifies Percy's biggest character flaw, that he blindly trusts anyone in a position of power, and he seems incapable of seeing what people really are. But he also picks him because he knows that the Weasleys are tight with Dumbledore, and he wants to try and use Percy to spy on the rest of the Weasley family. So in my opinion, this is where Percy really messes up, because he's literally just gotten into a bunch of trouble for blindly trusting Barty Crouch's weird instructions the previous year, and not noticing that something weird was going on. Rather than learning from this, he again blindly trusts it when Fudge weirdly gives him a huge promotion, despite the fact that he wasn't very successful in his job the previous year. Now, Mr. Weasley points out the fact that it's very suspicious that Fudge has promoted him shortly after Fudge fell out with Dumbledore over Voldemort's return. Now, Percy should have just trusted and believed his family, Dumbledore and Harry, all of who have always been really good to Percy and clearly had his best interests at heart. They're his day ones and they warn him that Fudge is trying to use Percy. But again, Percy, being a complete power-hungry moron, falls out with his entire family and says that Dumbledore and Harry are liars and that Percy's loyalties lay with the Ministry. He moves out of the family home and he stops speaking to anyone in his family and Dumbledore. Such a bad move from Percy. His judgment is just dreadful from this point onwards, it just gets worse and worse. A couple of months into that year, he sends Ron a letter congratulating him for becoming a school prefect, and he offers Ron advice to stop speaking to Harry because he says that Harry is a crazy violent liar, and he actually tells Ron to spy on Harry for Professor Umbridge. Like, what the heck? What was he smoking, I swear to God? He literally sold his soul for his career. And it gets even worse. At the end of the Order of the Phoenix year, when Voldemort publicly returns and Fudge sees him with his own eyes, Fudge has to admit that he was wrong and Dumbledore and Harry were right, and Fudge ends up losing his job over it. Now, you would have thought at this point Percy would have gone crawling back to his family with his tail between his legs and begging for forgiveness. But no, presumably because he was embarrassed about being wrong. He still doesn't say a word to his family, and he continues in his same job, now working for the new Minister for Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour. What a complete melt. A few months later, at Christmas time, during Harry's 6th year, Percy turns up to the Burrow on Christmas Day with the Minister of Magic Scrimgeour. What a loser working on Christmas Day. Surely nothing Percy had to contribute was actually important enough that he needed to work on Christmas Day. When they turn up, Scrimgeour says that they just happened to be in the area at the time, and Percy was desperate to see his family on Christmas Day. Like, yeah, alright, if you say so, mate. The real reason was that Scrimgeour wanted to question Harry about what Dumbledore was up to, and wanted Harry to publicly announce his support for the Ministry. So basically, Scrimgeour took Percy with him to give him an excuse for being at the Burrow on Christmas Day. And Percy, being completely whipped like he is, went along for the ride. Percy would literally do anything for a little bit of attention from someone important. I guarantee if the Minister of Magic had asked him to run down Diagon Alley High Street completely naked, yodeling at the top of his voice, he would have done it. Anyway, so Scrimgeour and Harry have a little stroll around the garden, and by the time they get back to the dining room, Percy's face is covered in mashed potato. Serves him right, to be fair, what a loser. About 7 months or so after this point, Scrimgeour dies at the hands of Voldemort's Death Eaters, and they install their puppet Minister for Magic, Pius Thicknesse, who is under the Imperius Curse. So basically at this point, Percy is essentially working for Voldemort. Nice one, Percy. Percy then continues working at the Ministry, essentially under Voldemort, for like another 10 months, which is wild. And he still doesn't apologise to his family or anything. It says a lot that the Death Eaters kept Percy working in a fairly important position. They must have been completely convinced that he really was a complete idiot. Anyway, so eventually Percy comes to his senses that he's literally abandoned his entire family to work for Voldemort, and he turns up at the Battle of Hogwarts at the very end to join in the fight against Voldemort and the Death Eaters. About time, Percy, bloody hell. So he makes up with his family finally, and he joins in the fight. And in fairness, he does redeem himself when he meets Pius Thicknesse, Voldemort's Minister for Magic, in a duel, and he wins, sending Thicknesse flying through the air, and then Percy screams, "Hello, Minister, did I mention I'm resigning?" It's literally the first time in living memory that Percy has ever made a joke. It's pretty iconic stuff, to be fair. What a comeback. Percy's rise, fall, and rise again is a quality character development throughout these books, and the films really didn't do it justice at all. It's actually mad how much Percy's allegiance is changed several times throughout this story. It's pretty iconic, and Percy deserves his moment in the spotlight as much as the next Weasley. It just goes to show everyone makes mistakes, and it's never too late to apologise to your family for abandoning them for your pursuit of Ministry of Magic power and success. Something we can all relate with, I'm sure. Let's hope the HBO series does Percy's full arc the justice it deserves, specifically from the 4th season onwards. We'll have to wait and find out. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, drop it a like and subscribe to the channel for more.